I need to change the title. I didn't want to mislead you by saying don't worry, be happy. That was a tune that was popular during the last sort of real estate debacle. You know, don't worry, be happy. Can't do that this time. Let me start with good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to be with you today. And let me put up this sort of pretty picture. This happens to be our front yard. It's a little unique. It's as xeric as we can make it. We live out in North Albuquerque acres. And it's creeping thyme that's blooming. I don't have to mow it. I have to pick a few weeds out of it once in a while. But you might want to commit this to memory because it could get ugly later on. Here's a definition of worry. I'll give you a minute or two to look that over. And we know worry doesn't do us a whole lot of good when times are tough. And at the end of the second paragraph, it starts to talk in cautionary terms, which really leads us to worry. I like this definition of worry. If more of us were maybe a bit more wary a bit more of the time, maybe we wouldn't see market bubbles and market crashes. I don't know, it's a possibility. And I don't want to come across as pessimistic or skeptical. Wary is not that. Can you all hear me okay? I don't want to shout. Jack, can you hear me? Okay. Of the few instructional materials I was given when I started my career in real estate, the fellow who was my instructor gave me a little booklet entitled Speculation as a Fine Art by D.G. Watson. It was written in 1888. And here is his definition of speculation. Speculation done right is what makes a free market work. I have certainly seen that in my 36-year career, and I've seen when it isn't done right, the negative effects of that. I mention this because a whole lot of media coverage and other folks have been painting speculation in a bad light. And I think what happens from time to time is the gambling part of the discussion, when you go back to the definition, comes more into play, and the cautionary, calculated part goes out of play. And so people take gambling into their actions, and they call it speculation, and that's absolutely not true. And so when you get gambling, you get market bubbles, and people call it speculation, and somehow that's bad. And we're about to see, I think, particularly at the federal level, a lot of regulation because people, private enterprise, the free market system likes to speculate. Done right, you don't need that sort of regulation. Be wary of the political process that's going to tend to regulate our free market system. Here's an understatement. This was our bocce court at home. But on this particular day recently, I was responsible for taking care of the grandkids for the better part of the day, all by myself. They don't know about the economy, and they had a blast, as you can see. I'm guessing we're in for a protracted period of news like this. One day bright, one day dark, one day bright, one day dark. Some days a little both. And I expect it's probably going to go on the rest of this year and into next year. Here's where we're really at. 30 million new jobs were formed in the United States between 1968 and 1980, going a ways back. Those in the Fortune 1000 who were manufacturers had net losses in blue-collar employment during this period, and the rise of a white-collar society was upon us. During the same period, there was tremendous social and economic upheaval. Vietnam veterans returned home and felt disgraced. Nixon resigned as president. Oil embargoes led to high gas prices and lines at filling stations. Inflation at one point reached 12%. The Carter administration adopted new energy policies, restricting where thermostats could be set in buildings and new building codes, and we ended the decade with interest rates at 21%, and the Iranians holding a number of Americans hostage. Isn't that interesting? The 80s brought a new president in Reagan. Supply-side economics, inflation at 3% or less over the decade, stabilization of interest rates at lower levels, the onset of the desktop or personal computer, the end of the Iranian hostage crisis, the Tax Reform Acts of 1981 and 1986, beginnings of the fall of Soviet domination in Europe, a $1 billion government loan to the automaker known as Chrysler, tremendous overbuilding of commercial real estate through the mid-80s, the crash of the savings and loan industry, sick building syndrome attributable to Carter energy policies, and a crash in the commercial real estate markets that began in early 1987 and ended somewhere in 1994. The 90s brought us Clinton, the contract with America, the rise of the dot-coms, and the reemergence of real estate investment trusts. These were groups that got their start in the 70s, disappeared very quickly, and came back in the early 90s and started buying up all sorts of distressed commercial real estate from the savings and loan debacle that just preceded it. And the first decade almost of the 21st century has shown us the fall of the dot-coms, terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, still low inflation for the moment, lower interest rates, recklessness in the housing market that led to a bubble and a crash, recklessness on Wall Street that led to a bubble and a crash, recklessness in commercial real estate that led to a bubble, and we'll talk about crash in a few minutes, recklessness with the big three automakers, recklessness in government and political leaders who evoked fear, uncertainty, and panic, and then reacted with unprecedented government expansion into the private sector and pork barrel of bailout spending in response to all of that. Did I miss anything? This gentleman, Dr. James Krupe, was at a national conference I attended in 1995. He was the keynote speaker. He took a look at the past, present, and future of our country in a way that ranks among the most significant presentations I've ever heard. And folks, I've been privileged to hear people like Henry Kissinger and Caspar Weinberger and Alan Greenspan along the way. The essence of what Dr. Krupe said was this: in the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution began, and we began moving away from an agricultural-based economy. We know that. When that happened, jobs were lost, businesses closed, and people had to be retrained to work in a more automated world. Fast forward to the late 1960s, and as I just referenced, we started moving away from an industrial economy and into what some have called the information age, or the age of knowledge and communication. And guess what? Jobs have been lost, businesses have closed, and people have to be retrained and are being retrained. You can add to this the idea of increases in worker productivity as well over the past few decades through mergers and acquisitions and efficiency, quality improvement methodologies like Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, ISO 9000 standards that have even crept into service industries like insurance and banking, but not real estate so far. Well, if you look at the stock market of the past few years, maybe the bubble years we should call them, you would certainly be left with the impression that it was a good time to invest because companies appeared to be profitable. But I want to advance the notion that maybe their profitability was not so much a function of revenue growth, but increased operational efficiency for the reasons, some of the reasons I just mentioned. Meaning their expenses were less for the same or better output, which is how they remain profitable. And the point of that is when you're competing in a global marketplace, at some point, market share becomes a problem, revenues stagnate, decline, and grow less exponentially. If you take all of this into account with our current economic situation, it has not been a surprise, at least to me, that we simply were running out of gas when the recession began in December of 2007. And what happened next was when Bush, Paulson, and Bernanke they accelerated the process when they so very publicly pushed the panic button that fateful day in September last year. Hopefully, as you've taken a minute to look through my real estate forecast that I put out in December of 2008, I started writing that about a month after the Paulson announcement, refined it through early November, and published and distributed to clients and friends and colleagues in early December. Really, there's not much in it that I would change. The one thing that I think would change is the forecast part of when the recovery may occur. I said sometime in 2010. I suspect that from what you'll hear in a little bit, you would agree it's going to be longer than that. So what I want to do now is make this connection between jobs and commercial real estate, which over the bubble years, when people seemed to do nonsensical things, was certainly not too well thought about. You like the disclaimer? Here in Albuquerque, 24,200 unemployed April of this year. 6% unemployment rate. Bureau of Labor Statistics. I didn't make up the number. These numbers are fairly commonly accepted as where we are currently today in Albuquerque's vacancy factors. Most of us are forecasting increased vacancy as this year wears on. Typically, when unemployment starts to fall, eventually occupancy will rise. If unemployment continues to rise, vacancy will continue to rise. This is true in normal times. These are not normal times. What I've done here is to try to project what the vacant space translates to in terms of desk space or chairs to fill. And so pulling the numbers together shows that we have more desk space and seats to fill than we actually have people looking for work. To me, this is but one sign of the weakness in our market. If you're a landlord, this is not encouraging. If you're a tenant, you've got some opportunity to get some attractive lease terms, and the same if you're a buyer. And if you're in the economic development business, you would likely view this as an opportunity as well. Referring to my written forecast, it talks about the 70 standard for bank lending practices being brought forward to now. In interviewing my friends Glenna Guevara, Vice President of Private Banking, and Ken Jones, Vice President of Commercial Loans at Bank of the West, they pretty much agreed with those elements in my forecast as to their requirements for commercial loans from now and into the near future. They also said they are quite busy now, in part because some new customers are moving to their bank. Particularly those who can't get loans because the banks they've been used to don't have the capital to lend. Pretty interesting that they said that. Ken commented on how he sees us moving away from a leverage-based society and to an ownership-based society where we actually look to savings and investment without debt or with much less of it going forward. And his view is the banks will not relax their standards for lending for some time to come. So to get a loan, you've got to establish a banking relationship. You've got to have some of your own real money in the venture. The reason I say schizoid is because of the imposing nature of the federal government. On the one hand, they've told many banks they have to shore up their capital and force them to take TARP money. Bank of the West, by the way, is not one of those. They also want the banks to start lending. That's the political side of the equation. The regulatory side says, don't make any bad loans. So they're being pushed to make loans and they're being told not to. There's so much uncertainty at the moment that it's very, very difficult for banks to lend, other than to cream of the crop clients and cream of the crop transactions. And so the effect of all the government infusion of capital into the banking system is not having the intended effect the government wanted. You've seen this before, I'm sure. Rise and fall of the economy. This is sort of the commercial real estate lending cycle depicted over the rise and fall of the economy. And the interesting thing is, banks and other lenders tend not to start lending until point A, near the top of demand, and they lend all the way down toward B, probably longer than they should. And there's reasons for this. They need all those leading economic indicators to convince them that it's really and truly the time to lend. You don't do it just because they're hateful. The mistake is it takes a while to see those leading indicators fall for them to stop lending. This is a normal cycle, and it goes over and over. This is where I think we are now. Now, I don't have numbers on there for time or GDP or any of that stuff. I'm just trying to graphically depict how the cycle looks a little different. We went and lent way too long and had a lot of money come into the system for a very long period of time, and we're really negative. That's how it looks. Not good. So, the $64,000 question. Commercial real estate loan maturities for the next 8 or 9 years are estimated to be in the $1 trillion range. People needing to get their loans refinanced. They already have loans, they need to get them refinanced. This isn't about new loans for new projects. This is just the refinance market. If tank means collapse completely, probably not. If tank means be at really, really low levels for a really long time where lots of people are hurting, I'm afraid to say probably so. I'm going to quote others for the response. This is from Reuters. The U.S. urban commercial real estate markets probably will not recover until 2017. The head analyst of commercial mortgages for Deutsche Bank said on Monday. The froth is still working itself out, Richard Parkes, Deutsche Bank head of commercial mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities synthetics research, said at the Reuters Global Real Estate Summit in New York. We are currently in something which is comparable to what we saw in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and potentially worse. U.S. commercial real estate values could fall by more than 50% from the peak in 2007, he said. Although asking rents are down about 28% in New York, factoring in free rent and other perks by landlords, rents are down about 50%, Parkes said. Now this is New York, he's talking to a New York audience. Rents will be back to where they were in 2017, Parkes said. Building prices will also take 6 to 8 years to recover. The U.S. commercial markets are deteriorating at an increasing pace as rent dries up and demand plummets. That is leaving borrowers struggling to make their monthly mortgage payments. We are not only not approaching, we are not only not approaching stability, we are at a period of maximum deterioration. At least 2/3 of the loans maturing between 2009 and 2018 are unlikely to qualify for refinancing at maturity without significant equity infusions from borrowers. You're going to have to pay down your loan balance in order to get the rest of it refinanced. Another source, Financial Times. This is by Marin Somerset Webb, June 19. The fact that commercial property prices in the U.S. are still coming down so fast, along with the fact that residential prices remain under pressure, nearly 1 in 10 mortgages is in default, and there is another wave of adjustable rate resets still to come. All of that matters. It matters because the fate of banks is inextricably linked to U.S. property prices. As long as they are failing, we know the banking crisis isn't nearly over. There has been much happy talk in the press recently about the healthy crop of green shoots and the depression that never happened. Such celebratory talk is way too premature. You can see that in the U.S.'s commercial property crash. You can see that in the U.S.'s commercial property crash, and you can see it in rising credit card defaults and incredibly low manufacturing capacity utilization, in increasingly tight lending standards, and in the fact that hours worked and earnings are on the way down in the U.S. Policymakers are big on the idea that you can make things better by making people more confident. But what good is confidence to a consumer with no cash? Turner points out that one of Japan's major problems during the 1990s was the fact that by putting so much pressure on companies to dispose of bad debts and boost profitability, the Japanese government inadvertently sent wages spiraling down, destroying consumption and any hope of domestic recovery as it did so. And that went on for 10 years. If any of you are familiar with Reason magazine, just an anecdote, there is the feature article in Reason magazine. It's a libertarian foundation that writes this. Talks about Obama policies and the potential for a lost decade like the Japanese because of what is coming through their system. Okay, that's the heavy-duty stuff. We're not making any more of it. New Mexico is the 5th largest state in the continental U.S. in land area, representing 121,000 square miles, or about 78 million acres. After set-asides for national and state parks, military and Indian reservations, and other monuments, preserves, government holdings, and such as that, there's estimated to be only 1/3 of that total land area available for private ownership. Interesting to me about that statistic is that I thought the Europeans came here to get away from the tyrannical kings and lords to own property. 2/3 is owned by government in New Mexico. Of the 1/3 that's in private hands, it's estimated that 2/3 of that has no immediate access to water supplies and in many cases transportation networks. So when you do the math, that really leaves 11% of New Mexico's total 78 million acres possible to use for private purposes. And that pretty much makes up the towns and cities that are on the map today, about 8.5 million acres. And so we all know that just about everywhere on the planet, to go from something like this to something like this, we need something like this. Isn't that a pretty picture? Many of you have seen this kind of information before. The point I want to make on this slide is the persons per square mile. This is what a square mile looks like if you're not in a real estate business and not familiar with it. Wyoming, Montgomery, Candelaria, Louisiana. It contains 640 acres and farmers refer to it as a section of land. 2,480 some people living in that square mile. There has been a lot of effort put into something called smart growth by policymakers over the past many years here and elsewhere in the country, sometimes referred to as new urbanism. To simplify, why things like transit-oriented development and urban densification to make it happen and other grand social ideas that emerge from some of our modern-day social engineers cannot possibly work. I've drawn some comparisons to places that are already densely populated and where things like light rail and other mass transit does not work but is pushed heavily. It does not work, at least not without massive taxpayer subsidy. Some of you were here a couple weeks ago for John Charles' presentation from Portland, Oregon. He talked in real numbers about this. He showed the drain on local, state, and federal taxpayers in all of the transit-oriented development programs going on in the Portland area. And what I can tell you is that Albuquerque's political leadership over the past many years has wanted to be like Portland. It's not a good idea. My personal view is, with the way New Mexico tends to rank close to last or dead last in most categories most of the time, we all know that, things like the Rail Runner and Marty's Trolley and arenas with no venues are a diversion we cannot afford. We simply don't have the population to support it. It's right there before you. And our current planning methodologies and other restrictions on growth and development, not to mention restrictions on our water supply, there's no amount of pushing and no amount of taxpayer money that can change that or make it work better. Yet we continue to do that politically. The offered benefits of these massive government port rail projects, like saving fuel, are disproportionately low compared to how the money would be better spent on more important, more sustainable things. Another reflection of that population per square mile comparison. So this is where we've come to. Nearly 1/2 of the land left in the metro area is now controlled by 2 property owners. There they are. You hear about them in the news a lot. One has the benefit of a tax increment development district, meaning they can sell bonds to build infrastructure and capture tax revenues to help pay those back instead of the city doing it. The other does not. Folks, we have all of our marbles in kind of a really strange place with Monopoly. This is the game of Monopoly right here. And people wonder why I'm often quoted as saying we have a land supply problem in Albuquerque. We do. We're up against the mountains, we're up against the military and Indian reservation. This is what's left. Tell me what you think is going to happen to the price when they are our only choice. There's still some land left, but not much. Here's a favorite list. I don't know if the mayor council form of government is a good or bad thing, but what I do know is, through observation, the power struggle that goes on between those two entities and the whimsical nature of the council over the years hasn't been a good thing from the standpoint of growing the private sector here. I would say it's probably done more to prevent private sector job growth. What I do know is that government has grabbed an increasing amount of power over the development process and an individual's right to reasonable enjoyment of his or her private property. It's clear. Instead of reasonable and prescriptive codes and ordinances, the kind that say, if you do this, this, and this, these are our requirements, then you will get a building permit or you will get a development plan approved. The city has moved to now broad policy statements that basically say, you bring your land to us, you tell us what you want to do, and we'll get back to you. We'll let you know. We want this, we want that, and oh, we want this, and oh, we want that, and we'll get back to you. That kind of uncertainty does not help the private sector. It does not foster job growth. And folks, that's where we are. Just so you know, the near northeast Heights, the part where there's grid streets, that predated pretty much all of what you see on the screen there. And it seems to work pretty well. And do you hear people complain that they can go to the store on Manal pretty conveniently? Or that a fire truck or an EMS can get through their neighborhood when the main street's clogged? Those kind of things were thought out in the 50s, and the town was built that way, moving up from downtown. But somehow when we got into the 80s and 90s and now, none of that's acceptable to planners. I'll save my diatribe about downtown revitalization. By the way, I don't think the downtown core should rot. I just think the way they've gone about it for the last 40 years just hasn't worked. Nobody knows how much money they've spent. The 2/3 of New Mexico's legislature that is rural very often doesn't like what goes on in Albuquerque. And so you have another battle, power struggle, all the time. Is that a good thing for the state? I don't know. Albuquerque is unquestionably the economic engine for New Mexico. And we, of course, that are members of the Rio Grande Foundation, believe in free market versus government. That's not the case here. Marty was against smart growth. He was for smart growth before he was against it. And then he was for it when he found out that the council had a supermajority and override his veto, and he didn't want his veto overridden, so he voted for it. Strictly a political decision, didn't have anything to do with the good of the community. And we're paying for it. This is one of my fun things to talk about. The Vista Del Norte subdivision made the news over the last many years, where City Council decided they were going to buy the last piece of commercial land and make a balloon landing field out of it. This was 600 acres of industrial land that was taken out of the inventory by the city and not replaced anywhere. Now we need, as I tried to demonstrate earlier, industrial land for jobs to go. The city has had a pattern of downzoning industrial land for at least 25 years and not replacing it. They just take it out of the inventory. We can build houses, we can do retail, we can do office, mixed use, all that wonderful stuff. But the place where economic base jobs needs to go is gone. We're out of industrial land in this community. In this particular case, once the residents got there, politicians joined with them and killed the Walmart. They had no services there. This is the boundaries of that subdivision. Osuna on the south, Paseo del Norte on the north, just below Journal Center off the freeway up there. They haven't got a Circle K within miles, but they killed the Walmart. It was bad. This is what my interpretation of that 600 acres as an industrial park would look like in terms of jobs. And you don't need to do the math, I just wanted to show you that I did. Each time the city removes an acre of industrial land from the inventory, they will remove the opportunity of 16 jobs, more or less. Since industrial land tends to be the lowest density for jobs, if they take out land zoned for other commercial purposes like offices or retail, that's even more jobs they're taking away. Right now, we are all but out of industrial zone land that is suitable for development, and yes, there is some industrial land, but it's not suitable for development. The way the planning department does this is they take aerial photography and they overlay zoning map transparencies and they pick out the industrial land and they estimate the acreage. They don't know whether it's for sale. They don't know or look to see if there's a water line to it. They don't do any of those things. They just total up. There's this many vacant industrial zoned acres. We have thousands of acres. We don't have a need for that, so we pick off some and don't worry about it. There's no other scientific thought that goes into it. And the problem is that in the Vista del Norte case, it was surrounded by industrial. It made the most sense to support that for industrial. The infrastructure was there. It didn't make sense to have a residential neighborhood there. It was sold on the basis of we need houses for people to be able to walk and ride their bikes to their offices in Journal Center because it's nearby. That's how that got through the process. So we now have two monopoly landowners who can help with this problem. One of them, Mesa del Sol, the one with the TID, is not terribly oriented to a broad array of light industrial applications. In fact, it doesn't really fit their town center concept. The other, SunCal, the one without the TID, the legislature just refused to pass. And we could argue about whether TIDs are good or bad. That's another subject. SunCal was in the news a day or two ago as having problems meeting a deadline for extension of roads and a road or water line or both. Where are we going to get our industrial land? Politicians move mountains with the use of corporate welfare, which we know is taxpayer money, to bring in large employers. They do not do this for small businesses. In fact, most of us in small business don't want that. Small business is the economic engine of America. Every economist says that. I don't care where in the country or what your political persuasion. Small business is the economic engine. Instead, small business gets red tape, delays, denials, and all sorts of other nonsense. And when is the last time you saw a mayor cut a ribbon for a 13,000 square foot building that's going to employ 16 people? It's just not important. Some things to contemplate. As our generation, baby boom generation, retires over the next several years, 10, 15, 20 years, who's going to replace us? Will our seats need to be filled? If our seats don't need to be filled, what does that do to commercial real estate? What about a declining birth rate? What about immigration? How does that affect us? What about the internet, the ability to buy things over the internet and not go to a store? What about people working from home offices virtually? The Rio Grande Foundation is migrating into a virtual office concept for all the staff. We don't have a physical office that we're paying rent on. What about a global economy? Lots of things that can affect commercial real estate going forward. So moving near the end. I pick on a little everybody. I've never heard a politician not say he was for jobs. Every politician that's a candidate running for office says, I'm for jobs. Do you ever hear them say they have a plan for how they're going to get the jobs? Pretty much not. Be wary of those people. Realtors. I am exceedingly frustrated for the time I've spent in my career trying to understand how the world works. That too many people in our business don't understand the fundamental, very basic valuation methodology for pricing property. They don't have to be appraisers, but the methodology they're using is very substandard. This one's easy, lenders. If somebody wants to give you more money than you think the project's worth, you probably don't want it. And the media.
Thanks for the plug, Vic. We believe everything we say.
This is one of those OMG ones here. I mean, nothing down, come on. This doesn't work. This one's important. This is a preamble to the Code of Ethics of the National Association of Realtors. I first saw this document in about 1974. I chaired the then Albuquerque Board of Realtors Professional Standard Committee in 1979. I was on the committee for a couple of years before that. I take this stuff pretty seriously. If you ask most realtors, yeah, they'll tell you they've seen it. They don't know what it means. The broader document contains 16 or 17 articles of the Code of Ethics and standards of practice that go with it. They're aware of it, but they do not incorporate it in a best practices sense to their business practices. If more of them did, we might have less problems. So here you go. These are the muddy ones plus one. I'm always wary, and I think it's good to be wary about our surroundings and about the things that we interact with and the advice that we give people. There's nothing wrong with that. But without being wary, this is who I worry for. I worry for these guys in our future. So I come to the end. If you want to ask a question, I will try to answer it. If you want to hang on, I've got some more foibles. I have some World War II memorial photos. We were just there. Up to you. Thank you for your attention today.
Will this slideshow be available anywhere?
Oh, for a price. You have my contact information. It's been handed out. If not, find it and send me an email and we'll figure out something.
Terrific. Thank you. Vic, we can upload this to the website as well.
Sure. Richard.
Vic, on your comparisons of private land in Mexico versus public, how does that compare to some of the other western states?
I have not focused on that. I get a sense that most of the western states have commissioners of public lands and that sort of thing because they were land grant states. I don't know. I suspect that Arizona is probably pretty similar. I doubt if Texas is. Colorado might be kind of close. And you know, if nothing else, I mean, water's a problem in the West, and that's part of why we have these towns just in limited locations along waterways. I see another. Ms. Jones. Everyone, Trudy Jones, our city councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. So my question is, we have these beliefs, we're conservative, we're for anti-government. Why is it that some of us who have the time, maybe are retired, have the brains, have the understanding of this, why don't some of us run for office and try to change this versus standing back and watching it happen against us?
Did you have anyone in mind.
We have a room full of people here who I believe have the wherewithal to work a non-paying job. And I'm just curious why some of us don't get out there and do that.
Yeah, it's a problem. And certainly I've been thinking about things like running for mayor since my mid-30s. And the last few years I live in the county, so I can't. But it's a problem, and I think some of us are going to have to step up. And I'm thinking about that myself right now. So your point's well taken.
Thank you.
Another hand? Yes, sir.
Vic, how does the rate of growth impact your numbers on Albuquerque? How does that fold into the equation?
Population growth?
Yes, sir.
Can you be a little more specific what you mean?
Well, for one, how does Albuquerque compare to the rest of the region and nation in terms of migration and growth in the city?
You know, things happen at a pretty stable pace here. I mean, our population may grow at like 1.5–2% a year. Typically in standard, normal, sort of typical economic times, our job base grows about that same rate. So it's kind of always, pretty even keel.
Given the fact that we're landlocked, isn't that going to ultimately impact our transportation system in a pretty negative way at some point?
Well, I'm not sure where you're going. I mean, the fact that we're landlocked and we have restricted water supplies suggests that we can't support too much more population, is the way I look at it. The one political persuasion is that we should densify, we should cram more people into downtown lofts, and things like that. And once we do that, then we should have light rail so they can go in a straight line up and down to Nob Hill and back, or the university and back. And everyone's going to live sort of in that corridor. Now, I'm being dramatic, obviously. But that's not the way people want to live. That's not the way the majority of the community lives. It's not the way most Western cities and Western states have developed. So all the money that's going into that sort of transit-oriented development, urban densification approach, I'm not sure where it leads us. I don't think it solves a population problem. People still have to live somewhere. And yes, we can go up, but can we still supply a drink of water? I don't know.
Vic, we had a large company come here to build planes. This is Eclipse Aviation. Is there a better way to get companies to move here and generate jobs than that fiasco?
One of my favorite subjects. We've resorted to this corporate welfare thing, and most people would say it's a good thing to use taxpayer money to incentivize a company to lower their cost through wage incentives and capital infrastructure applications for tenant improvements or water line extensions, to use taxpayer money to reduce the project cost so that it can occupy the place more competitively. That's been the theme for the last 36 years of my career. It works in a few instances. I was just involved in this large Hewlett-Packard call center that's going into Rio Rancho. Politically, I don't quite agree with what went on there. The governor promised them $16 million of taxpayer money to lower the project cost. The legislature only approved about $6 million of it. That was a problem. Wage incentives, I recall, were something like $57 million over a 10-year period. I don't know where that gets made up. The other side of that, I can argue kind of both sides. The other side of that is it would be, rabbit brush and rabbits out there without that. And so at some point in the future, that building gets used by somebody, and maybe that's a break-even proposition for the people of New Mexico until that happens. Maybe over time we get that back, and then the next generation gets the benefit of those facilities that otherwise wouldn't be there. I don't know how to measure that. I think it's probably, you can measure it somewhat. My personal belief is that we've become so dominant in our public policy in New Mexico and in Albuquerque in particular, it's anti-growth, anti-business. And so if we would foster and facilitate and open up the doors for private capital to want to come here and be spent on its own, like it does in our surrounding states. The economic engine in Arizona, in Colorado, in Utah, Texas, and Oklahoma is dramatically different than it is here. It's dramatically different. There's a reason for it. So what can we do to change public policy so that companies just want to come here on their own and really want to hire our people and really want to build buildings? I think that's where the problem has been. We've been focused wrong for a long time. The economic development people, all of whom I love and enjoy their company, have decided to take a position where they are not going to engage in public policy decision making. Their job is to recruit. They recruit, they recruit, they recruit. They bring companies, they bring companies, they bring companies. And then they come to guys like me and Trudy and others in the audience and say, we don't have any place to put them. Well, no kidding. I had 3 sites that qualified for this Hewlett-Packard call center. 3. And all those thousands of acres that we put out there, 3 sites. That was it. There's something wrong with that picture. So I think it's public policy that's holding us back. And I'd like to see that change.
Thank you for your interesting talk. I live in Vista del Norte, by the way, so
Yes.
I found that quite interesting, your discussion of it.
Are you mad at me?
No, it helps to clarify a few things. We definitely could use some services there. I think they're going to build a small retail thing in the front there, but
Good luck with that. I don't know where they're going to get a loan.
But could you expand a little bit more on your discussion of the downtown area? I'm kind of curious about that. A little bit more about why you think the approach was misguided and what you would have recommended instead.
Well, if you look at the central business districts of similar sized cities, they're much larger geographically than ours. That's a start, okay? So we just have a really small downtown geographically. And in order to expand it to where you could do things like they've tried to do in Portland and have all these high-rise buildings and wonderfulness, you've got to go over there and take somebody that's lived there for 400 years and displace them. That doesn't work here very well out of their home. So that's part of the problem, and there's not a will, there's not been a will to do that. We go back and forth about whether we want surface parking lots or parking garages, and whether we should take a house out and put a parking lot there, or McDonald's, or, you know, the 40 years worth of planning that's gone into downtown really hasn't amounted to much. It's kind of utopian, mystical sorts of stuff. Gee, if we could just have a festival marketplace. Some of you around remember the festival marketplace grand scam that was going to go where the rail yard is over there, okay? These are wonderful ideas, but without huge taxpayer subsidy, they can't work. When urban renewal money came here in the late 1960s, federal urban renewal money, that was when they literally flattened downtown, and they built a new jail, a new city hall, a convention center, some county offices and court building, pretty much where they are today. Some of those have been repositioned or used differently. They had an opportunity to put the convention center right here, next to the museums, and build a hotel convention sort of complex near Old Town, where people could go get dinner and do normal things, okay? But they said, no, in order for downtown to grow and be vital, we've got to put hotels and restaurants in downtown, and let's build a convention center over there. It's never worked. They subsidize it, hotels. We need hotels to make the convention center work. So let's give a hotel a subsidy so that we have something to sell our conventioneers. And then the convention center's not big enough, so they expand it. By the way, in the expansion in 1985, when I could build an office building for $100 a square foot, gleaming high-rise 10-story building, all fit out, $100 a square foot, the expansion of the convention center on the other side of 2nd Street cost $500 a square foot. And folks, it's a warehouse with a couple windows in it. So it's just bad political decision-making that has caused us not to be able to get out of our neighborhood, do things on a grand scale over a long period of time properly. It's political. You know, the mayor wants an arena on his watch. Let's have it. Another guy wants this on their watch. I've got my name on that building. Is that good for the community? I don't think so. So it's been this hopscotch thing, and that's part of why downtown revitalization hasn't worked, just a small part. Do we need to cut it off, Paul?
No, we've got time for a few more questions, but in order to give everyone time to fill out, we should all have cards, evaluation cards. Please fill them out and put your name and address on there, email especially to get information from the organization. Give Vic a few thoughts about his presentation. And as a sweetener, We have an excellent book called Common Sense Economics that we're giving one copy of to whoever is the lucky card drawer winner. So we're going to just draw a card before you all leave, and you can have a copy of this book. It's the best book I've ever seen as far as explaining basic economic principles and then taking them to your own life and your own situation, personal finance, something that's all too lacking. So we got a few more questions we can ask Vic, but please take the time now to fill that card out.
And please, if you need to get off to your day, don't. You please go. Work is more important than I want. Yes, sir.
A moment ago, you pointed out the problem with economic development people find a company, you can't necessarily find the land. Let's go at that from a different direction. You identified certain square footage of manufacturing spaces available. We have parcels, small parcels of land floating all over the place. What would be the kind of businesses that we should be getting to consume the inventory we have and to use the kind of land in the parcels and locations that we have as they exist now? What would you be telling economic development people to be looking for?
Well, let me talk about a land choice as an example. Are you familiar with the Sportsman land down in the South Valley? Where that is, sort of off Rio Bravo and between the railroad tracks and Broadway. And this family used to farm and grow cattle there, and you had a slaughterhouse and all that kind of local stuff. It's all zone industrial, and it's on the valley floor. A chief problem with that land is, now that the environmental cleanup has occurred from the nearby plants, is that it is very, very close to the water table. So accommodating heavy industrial buildings, as they tend to be, without shoring up foundations with pilasters and a lot of extra cost, makes it economically not feasible to build there. That's part of the problem with some of the remaining land. There's those kinds of things. The parcels that you can build on have gotten very expensive, and so the cost of occupancy, whether you're an owner or a tenant, when you're having to pay 30% or 40% more to occupy your building, everything else being equal, the two biggest things on the expense side of a P&L, once you get past the cost of goods sold, are the cost of labor and the cost of occupancy. Those are the two biggest things. So if I want to come to town and compete with somebody else selling widgets like me, I'm going to pay 30% more to buy one of those parcels and build a building than my competitor is. If his labor and all his other costs are the same, I've got to figure out some other way, if I really want to be here, to be able to afford that or remain profitable. And that's one of the reasons why it doesn't happen. It's one of the, and it's public policy that has led us to this conundrum. It's really a problem.
Well, you were throwing out some hypotheticals of if, I think it was Mr. Demott that you were talking about, if we had used this X amount from offices, why this would end up with X many jobs.
That's the current thing.
Are those viable alternatives given the economics that you just talked about?
Well, let me try and frame it in another example. When I took an industrial real estate course in Chicago in the mid-70s, their vacancy there was about the size of our total inventory, 24 million square feet vacant. And developers at that particular moment in time were anxious to go build more space with 24 million square feet sitting vacant. Why would they do that? Some of this stuff went back to this, survived the Chicago fire. It was functionally obsolete. And so, yes, there is a taker for it at some point of price, but it's not efficient space. And we have that in office buildings. We have it in retail stores where there's functional questions, whether it's location or parking or visibility or enough yard, a place to back a semi in. We have functional problems with some of the real estate that we already have. And it takes longer to find somebody at a price point that will accept those kinds of functional problems. That's one of the issues with the existing inventory. Some of it will never be taken. That always happens in every market. So does that help, or am I still not where you are? Sort of, yeah.
We'll talk some more.
Okay, all right. Anyone else? In the back.
I'm from the UNM area, and it seems that every single new building that goes up is government. one way or the other, whether it's the UNM or some sort of city project. What percentage of new commercial or industrial projects are private versus financed by the government?
I don't know, but it's a pretty good number. Trevor Hatchell's from C.B. Richard Ellis. Do you know if you guys track government in the inventory?
Osco, do we track government? No. Okay. No.
Yeah, because
Osco's our research and analyst, and she would know that.
And the reason why is, I'm sorry. And one of the reasons why is those buildings generally remain government property, and we in the private sector never get to use them, so they don't exist to us. That's one of the reasons. We just don't track it.
But the thing is, Vic, also they're obsolete. And you talk about downtown. Why doesn't GSA go downtown? Because they can't go downtown because of today's climate and because of today's security reasons.
Right.
And your downtown reason of expanding is just.
Thank you. Okay, so another hand. Chris?
Vic, I've heard often that Albuquerque is much less subject to the wild swings of peaks and valleys of the rest of the country. And A, do you know why that is? B, is it good? And C, will it continue? Is it true?
Yeah. I may have to ask you to repeat a couple of those. I think that most people that have been around a while would assess that the reason why is because we have so much government employment that we're insulated from those swings in the national economy. We don't have private businesses that have their capital at risk, and so we're insulated because we don't have that impact. Is that a good thing? I don't know. It takes a lot of taxpayer money to support government. What were the other two questions?
Well, you've answered two of them. The other is, will it continue? But I think your first answers say that it will continue because we're probably going to continue to have a large majority of government operations in our economy.
There's a lot of effort to give kudos to the economic development people. They spend a massive amount of effort trying to get the private sector here. And I can be dramatic in some of my remarks. It is a problem for them, and they're most sensitive to having to work with politicians of all political persuasions, and so for them to engage in the public policy debate is kind of a touchy-feely thing. It can be a problem for them. They need politicians to approve some of these things in order to get anything to happen, and so that's part of why they stay out of the debate. I think they could have engaged, and I still think they should, but there's a much broader pool of people that don't, and they've been around at least as long as I. It's just a difference in opinion. I don't know what our future has in store, private sector versus public sector. We have some policy issues that make it tough for the private sector to grow here. Question over here? Is that it? Gee whiz, thank you, folks.